even if you take a look back, the UNDP, they also came up with some stats. They say between 2018 and, I beg your pardon, between 2008 and 2010, that Africa lost $63.4 billion to illicit financial flows, which that is about $1.2 billion more than what it received in aid and foreign direct investment. Now, this UN body also went on to say that in 2013, $1.1 trillion left developing countries through illicit fund flow, which the World Bank described as cross-border movement of capital associated with illegal activities or money that is illicitly earned, transferred, or used that crosses the border. Now, of that stats, South Africa and Nigeria, incidentally, are reported to rank high among 30 countries, with highest incidences, with Nigeria losing between $15 and $18 billion annually. And this raises so much concern. Well, to look at some of the security implication of this, we've got Mr. Chigozie Obani here with us in the studios. He's a security consultant. Thank you for coming on this morning.
Thank you for having me.
Well, this figure is huge. Clearly, I mean, if they're not tracked, they could get into the wrong hands. I know that time and again, we've talked about follow the money and see if we could, identify where some of these things are going. So it does appear as though with these stats, we're not doing as much as we should do in Africa.
Evidently, we are not doing as much as we should do. And we haven't shown enough commitment to convince stakeholders to buy into the project. Unfortunately, we're only reacting to the carnage, the loss of lives, human lives, and that is causing us to react. But in terms of looking at the statistics as enumerated and then tracking and dealing with the issues, we haven't done enough. We just have not started.
That's a serious one then, given that Africa is in dire need of development, and with this kind of information, if there is such high insecurity, how can there be investment in the continent?
Sure. Governments, especially in Nigeria, we have grown up to hear foreign direct investments, attracting foreign investments. But the foreigner is not likely to invest where the local have not invested his pittances, his small funds. So first of all, we have to look at our own investments. How secured are they? How secured are lives and property? Movement within the country from point A to B is becoming very perilous and hazardous. So by the time we look at all this, then when the small investor, the local, has done well with his small investment, signals go. Every embassy across Africa has an intelligence desk. And from there they gather and send signals. So if you call someone in Israel, for instance, to come and invest in agriculture in Nigeria, and he knows that his investment, the local people are not safe, what do you want him to do? He will begin to look at the cost of securing himself, cost of securing his business before he brings in the investment. So we are losing so much. And when people cry out over insecurity of lives, before we talk about property, it's, those in government think that we are exaggerating. We are trying to paint the nation black. It is because of issues like this. So there is the need to secure the local life, first of all. And when that is done successfully, then you see that investments will begin to flow. Unless we are looking at the wrong investments, which is people who invest in arms and ammunition for conflict. Those are also investments. Maybe if that's what we want, then we'll get enough of it by the time the country boils. But I think the primary thing, first of all, is to secure lives and property of those living here, and then other components that make up Africa. Then we can work together and see how we can bring in further investments.
A combination of factors come into play here. I mean, usually in this kind of matters. For instance, now, when you speak about our mindset as individuals in this country and our approach, when it has to do with trying to do what we're trying to see what the maybe banks now are doing to ensure that they reduce to the barest minimum this window of opportunity for funds to leave the country for wrong purposes. When they put in some of those measures, do you think that do they communicate properly to customers to ensure for us to understand that look, what is being done is actually to this end? Or is it that it's just a blanket approach where people don't get to see where all of this is headed?
It is unfortunate that most security measures ever put in place, and also being put in place in Nigeria, are to checkmate the ordinary people, the small banker like you and me. Who own the banks? Who are those who move billions of naira in bullion vans without electronic transfer or instruments of transfer? They are the ones we should place our satellites on, and not the ordinary banker. So when you talk about the banks, they also have their own limitations. Take, for instance, during political activities, electioneering campaigns, politicians move huge sums of cash, and bullion vans move this cash into their homes for distribution. Fine and good. I have played politics, I have been around politicians, I have seen what it looks like. That is a precursor to movement of cash outside the country or laundering money into the country.
If they have to move funds for illicit purposes, for procurement of arms, or for destabilize certain areas, is it usually that visible?
It can always be visible, depending on who's moving cash. Take, for instance, there are reports that huge sums of money were being moved by soldiers. It's reported in the media, from one location to another. And a few soldiers bolted away with it. It's reported. So there is something fundamentally wrong with our style of business transactions.
We don't know if that one is illicit, though.
No. I'm not just
the movement of funds.
But I am talking about movement of funds. So at each time, the agencies saddled with checking money laundering are the ones, officers being used to move funds from one location to another. You cannot walk into the bank and take $1 billion without bringing in security officials who will accompany it from one place to another. That is the same way high-profile individuals move these funds in and out. It is bullion movement.
Forgive me, I may sound a little stupid or uninformed here, but aren't there laws, or how effective are the laws that limit how much someone can move at any given point?
There are laws, but it is those who make those laws that flout them. Take, for instance, something as little as driving against the traffic. Each time you move, something consciously tells you to be on the right lane. But by the time you see one VIP move against traffic, everybody joins. That is how simple it is. The laws are there. We have legislators improving on existing laws, enacting new ones. But who flouts them first? So they are the ones who flout them. And once that happens, we follow in the queue.
That means that the laws are not effective?
They are not, because the law enforcement is weak, 1. 2, also being used to flout the laws. If money laundering laws limits withdrawal by an individual to 500,000 naira per day, and I walk in with policemen, officials from the Department of State, who are detailed to protect me as a VIP, walk into the bank and move $1 billion, and they accompany me. Tell me why they should go after the small boys moving.
Which brings the issue back to the
3
issue.
million and 5 million.
Which brings us back to the issue the president raised at this conference.
That's right.
Illicit funds are responsible for in insecurity in the continent. So
that is true.
Does that mean there is nothing that can be done about it?
We have said this even on this forum. On this forum, I have said this over and over again. Funds, whether illicit or legitimate funds, it's like fuel to the fire. Right? The moment you take away that source, once you take away the source, you reduce the tendencies. What does that mean? I can recall that at some point we talked about those who finance terrorism. Where are the funds coming from? What about their mobile equipment? There was at some point the guys in Borno were moving with a brand of vehicles. And we named them. We said, who manufactured these vehicles? Every vehicle has a vehicle identification number, VIN, what we call chassis here. From the manufacturer, you can trace the VIN. From one point of manufacture to distributorship to sales, purchase, you can do something within that chain. And then call on the manufacturer, because this is a global threat, and bring in the manufacturer or their distributors to say, how does these vehicles move? At some point they were purchased. Who purchased them ab initio? Were they robbed from individual users in the country to do that? There may be one or two cases like that. But at some point, someone is financing that. Government probably did something to check funding. When they dry up funds, you see them move to kidnapping to raise funds. Kidnap Chibok girls, kidnap Dapchi girls, and they will raise funds. What do they use that to do? To refinance terrorism. So when you see killings in the name of herdsmen, clashes, and I say, if there is no cattle around, then it's not the herdsman, it is his mercenary. Or a new wave of terrorism, which is go in, kidnap people, raise money with which you can oil the wheels.
So are you saying that's the cycle, or that's the only cycle?
No, it can't be the only. Let me tell you something. I thank God you didn't introduce me as a security expert. A lot of people go about claiming to be security experts. With due respect for those who have taken very profound studies in security studies, I am one person who have said that momentarily the criminal is the expert. He sets the pace, and then security operatives and agencies and institutions will begin to study elements, dynamics, and then prepare. You may prepare 1 year, 2 years ahead of the criminal until he breaks in and takes another step, and you begin to follow. What am I saying here? It is not just one pattern. These guys have time to think. Some of them have been trained in security operations and management. Some of them have been security personnel. Some of them have deserted the army. Some of them have undertaken special training in terrorism and counter-terrorism, espionage around the world. Some go to certain designations that are known for this kind of crisis, take special training, then return to unleash mayhem. Entrepreneurs of violence also do their thing, do their business, get money to sponsor them, because that is where their businesses thrive. So it is not one pattern. That is back to your question. It's not one pattern. There are several patterns. But our duty is to continue to study the trends, and like you pursue rabbits, block this hole, it goes through the
But you know, there was something you began with the other time about the intelligentsia. This conference, you know, under review, is about the intelligentsia.
That's right.
So should the intelligence, or should the intelligentsia be following or preempting?
We should be ahead That is ideally. We should be ahead. We have criminologists, criminal psychologists. We have people who have taken deep studies. People should be brought together at different units to study trends, to study dynamics, and provide solutions with which government can work at all times. But the biggest challenge is politicizing security. When you listen to governments, they will accuse journalists, political groups, political actors of politicizing security. But somehow they lose sight of the fact that it is government and government officials who politicize security.
Let me even bring in this perspective because, one of some of the respondents there highlighted how they think that what they see where security tend to, leave the ordinary people vulnerable by focusing on maybe the those up there and pushing the ordinary people to making them susceptible to terrorists and their tendencies.
Right.
But before we even go to that, let me just bring this part in where infrastructure challenge is huge in the country because, look, you need data, you need a lot of these facilities to ensure that people keep looking to relevant authorities and not pushed to these other people. If some say, look, Nigeria needs, $20 billion over 10 years to boost their infrastructure, that's a huge challenge. And even across Africa, we see how this is a huge challenge. So in tackling this, how easy or difficult is this going to be?
Infrastructure is a big challenge. And every society is working towards improving its infrastructure or providing its infrastructural needs. But that alone does not take away insecurity or does not provide security. No society is crime-free. None. Which means the more civilized, the more infrastructure you provide, the more high-tech the criminals and criminality become. It's ever evolving, which means from stealing goats in the village to robbing the banks, from robbing the banks with a few young men break in with arms and shoot, to a few guys sitting on their laptop and transferring money. I'm coming, sir. So it's not just about providing infrastructure. The societies tend to have been more safe or safer when we didn't even have the so-called modern infrastructure. What has happened to us? We have not checked our borders adequately. The biggest challenge Nigeria is facing today is from external forces and influences.
Is it peculiar to us? Because don't forget, we also had these regional economic bodies who are supposed to allow free movements of persons and trade and goods. So
you see, do not forget that a few people have also said that those trade agreements should be reviewed. There has to be a people living. There has to be nations stable to do trade freely. So when a country is destabilized by external forces, you can even do business.
And speaking about that, those external bodies, external factor component in all of this, because those funds, if they move from Africa to the Western world, and then look, you know that the country and several other African countries have been asking them, look, return some of these funds belong here. And that is a huge challenge as well, because if people move these funds, will they be fair to say, look, some of these Western countries actually encourage these funds to come over if they think it's going to boost the economy? Because the hurdles in returning and getting these funds back to African countries is usually very huge.
Yeah, you see, when you accuse Western countries, it will look as if the parliament in Washington will sit down and deliberate on how to destabilize Nigeria. No. Banks, financial institutions are owned by businessmen all over the world. Fine. If you threaten somebody's business by way of, in our case, repatriation of funds, a few buccaneers within that system can think of how to create certain problems for you to deal with while the funds remain where they are. We won't rule out all those. But you see, everybody, individual, corporate, entity, nation, has enemies. I am dealing with my own enemies. You are dealing with yours. And that is where we bring in the God factor who, protects us from our enemies. But at some point, we should work hard to protect ourselves from those enemies, whether real or virtual.
How?
What am I saying here?
How?
Nigeria as a country Nigeria has its own enemies. Why the enmity? There are people who believe that if we take XYZ strides, it's going to hurt their own economy. What would they do? Find ways and means to undermine it. We should know all this. So we have to, first of all, when signing some of these agreements, we look at the security implications. The biggest challenge we have now are elements, criminal elements, infiltrating Nigeria from up north. And if we don't say it the way it is, we'll continue to play this nationalistic, faux nationalistic posture that won't take us anywhere. The borders up north are non-existent. Some will say they are porous, but I say they are non-existent. People come in, speak anything they like, do whatever they like, and vamoose. We must check those borders. And until we do that, we won't be able to handle the crisis here. If, take for instance, the little things that happen within the states, criminals, the police, when adequately funded, adequately motivated, can always deal with our internal issues.
Yeah, but what about in terms of the mindset and the consciousness of, us, the people now, in terms of how we approach this?
It's becoming agitated and irritated.
No, in terms of organizing ourselves, looking out for certain things, acting differently. Because, countries that face terrorist acts, you see they set up certain things, the citizens, there's a certain behavior that they bring to bear on a daily basis, which becomes part of their lives. Do we see that with us?
We do, to an extent. But the challenge here is this. A lot of local intelligence have proved that the most vicious enemies we have are from outside Nigeria. Take, for instance, the governor of Kaduna State, 3 years ago, made a public statement, told us that certain people came in from outside the country and got trapped in southern Kaduna during the 2011 elections. The former governor, late, may his soul rest in peace, tried to do something, and when he died, the tempo died down as well. Malam Rufai came in, set up a committee that negotiated, went to find out, and took it up from where the late governor stopped. Right? And at some point, they profiled, identified who they are, and persuaded them with cash to say, hey, stop killing. And according to the envoys, they made it clear that, oh, it is one of your own that's in power now. That is one thing I do not like. So when I say politicians politicize security, and then the bandwagon.
Okay. As we wind down, as we close with this, do you think any government actually come into place because their duty is to protect lives and citizens? Do they come into place to destabilize or politicize security and not act on intelligence? That will come back and bite them.
No, you see, people approach government for, from different platforms and different point of view. There's always an agenda. Somebody owing the bank and cannot pay can say, okay, if I become governor, at least I will offset my bill. And another one will say, another one says, hey, let me go in there and push my ethnic nationality into prominence. Another one goes in there and say, okay.
Don't forget, they don't just walk in there, they're elected.
Of course,
it comes back to us.
It's about funding, yes, because the electorate are not always, some vote ignorantly, and the system is always being manipulated. So people go into government to fulfill certain agenda, and when we say, oh, there's a hidden agenda, people laugh at it. So when somebody's pre-motive is, oh, my people are not in the mainstream, and he goes in there, what does he do? Consciously or unconsciously, he is pushing up that agenda. So the idea may not necessarily be to protect lives and property. It could also be a vendetta to destroy a people, reduce their influence in society, and lift another. And that is the dangerous trend in governance.
Okay, even if it's in the realm of conjecture. But we thank you for coming on this morning, Chigozie Ubani, security consultant.